Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called on the European Union to join the United States in adding pressure on Russia, indicating the possibility of more tariffs on countries buying Russian crude oil. The Trump administration has already imposed a 25% additional tariffs on India for its oil trade with Russia. Now, Bessent argued that the exert additional economic pressure could force President Vladimir Putin to go ahead with the peace talks with Ukraine. He said that the Russian economy will, quote, collapse if Washington and the European Union impose more secondary sanctions, purchase of Russian oil.
Pressure on Russia, but we need our European partners to follow us, because if the U.S. and the EU do this together, we are in a race now between how long can the Ukrainian military hold up versus how long can the Russian economy hold up. And if the U.S. and the EU can come in, do more sanctions, secondary tariffs on the countries that buy Russian oil, the Russian economy will be in full collapse, and that will bring President Putin to the table.
Bessent stressed on the fact that while the U.S. is ready to increase pressure on Russia, he expects the European Union to follow. Interestingly, European Union continues to purchase refined petroleum products from India, which are made from the same crude oil that New Delhi buys from Moscow. Bessent also did not name any country that may face the secondary tariffs. President Trump has threatened to penalize countries that buy Russia's oil, seeking to cut off a key funding source for Russian leader Vladimir Putin's war, but has so far only hit India with the so-called secondary sanctions, ignoring countries like China and Turkey, who also do massive business with Russia. Meanwhile, India and the European Union are set to significantly elevate their engagement this week, with 2 high-level ministerial visits to New Delhi and the 13th round of negotiations for a landmark free trade agreement. The flurry of diplomatic activity comes even as both sides aim to conclude the FTA by year's end, building on momentum from External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Brussels and visit of European college led by President Ursula von der Leyen to India. The European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, Christopher Hansen, and Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, Maros Sefcovic, will arrive in New Delhi, coinciding with the 13th round of FTA talks. All right, joining us live on the broadcast is Bishop Garrison, who is a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense and current senior fellow and adjunct professor, National Security Institute at George Mason University Law School. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, and welcome back. So there seems to be this inconsistency and doublespeak in America's strategy. It's seemingly asking the European Union to sanction itself. Does the U.S. even have a defined strategy on the issue?
Thank you for having me, first and foremost. The biggest thing here is that what we do have is opportunity. We have an opportunity to make good with our allies and show them that we're going to hold Vladimir Putin and Russia accountable for the number of tragic events that they've brought forth, not just since February of 22, but the ongoing conflict has really been going on since about February of 2014. So that's the biggest thing we have here. Now, what we're going to have to do is work with our allies to understand the best possible outcomes when it comes to forcing stronger sanctions on Russia. I've said on your network before, I've said on many networks and programs at this point, that the Russian economy has always been domestically in somewhat of dire straits, and the power that Putin projects internationally was helping to keep him afloat domestically. But now, if the U.S. and the European Union and other NATO member countries are very serious about holding him accountable, what we're going to see are much stronger sanctions, and we're going to see the opportunity to cut back on oil purchases from and petroleum purchases from Russia, and to really tighten down on his economic stability.
And then there's that bill that's sitting on Capitol Hill as well. That might be something to talk about as well. But Russia says that it's not going to change course despite more sanctions.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us should really be surprised for this. I think at this point, Vladimir Putin is all in, and nothing is going to stop him other than the will of other countries, of other international leaders to really push forward and really tighten the hold on what he can do from an economic perspective. We saw just in the last 48 hours a horrific attack on buildings in the Ukraine, on government buildings in Ukraine, something we have not seen previously. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 drones that were deployed as a part of these attacks, attacking targets that include innocent women and children to that end. So you're going to continue to see these type of tactics that the only thing that Vladimir Putin is going to accept is the full surrender of the Ukrainian government and its people. And we already know President Zelensky and others have rightfully said over and over again, we're not going to do that. We're not going to bend the knee in this regard. So Vladimir Putin's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. If he tries to back off, he's going to have issues domestically with his power. If he continues on this, it's only going to put him in a more difficult situation.
All right, very interesting. Of course, we're following this story very closely. We'll see what happens when those European leaders head to Washington. Bishop Garrison, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Always great to join. Thanks.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.